So we seem to be live.
Oh, yes, we are.
And hello, everyone. I'm Colombe. This is Andrea, and we are the co-founders of Atlas.
Very, very excited about this episode. But before we jump into it, I think we should actually go give an overview of why we're doing this once more, who we are, and then we can reveal the great topic of today.
Go for it.
So, Andrea, Colombe, we're the co-founder of Atlas. There's a global movement working to unite humanity. We have done all these slides for now a few days, and the topic is obviously what you see in the title: how to build a country. So why we should come together as humankind and try to be one place, one institution, one platform, to basically tackle together challenges and be one. And in today's episode, Colombe, from the height of her knowledge, has done a very cool research, because this week is about how supranational organizations have developed. Yesterday, we talked about the history. We found a very cool, interesting historical example about the Lycian League. There was basically the first supranational organization 2,000 years ago. And today, we are opening a new chapter.
Okay, so before getting there and before telling you what we're working on, let's just talk 2 seconds. So at Atlas, we are building a global country, as Andrea mentioned. This means that in 2023, we are launching global consultations in order to be able to crowdsource this. And we're doing this broadcast as a way of trying to talk together with people online. So send us your comments, ideas, feedback on what a global organization, what a global country, what a global federation should look like. Last week, the topic was countries, how they came about, the history of countries. We actually talked a lot about how messed up borders are and the need to open borders. Yesterday, we talked about the history of intergovernmental organizations, supranational organizations, and international organizations. We focused actually quite a bit on something super cool, and I want to mention it because it's relevant for today's podcast, which is the Lycian League.
Very cool.
So the Lycian League was built 2,000 years ago only, so in the first century before Christ, as a response to the bad, I don't know how to frame it, as a response to the fact that Rhodes was not respecting the rights and humanity of people in what is now a part of Turkey. So it was 23 cities that came together, built a common parliament, and had representative democracy at a federal level, basically, in the first century before Christ. And it lasted more than 100 years, which is so cool.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. So it shows that from more than 2,000 years ago, humans understood that together they were stronger and they needed to unite. And then we jumped to talk about the League of Nations, about the United Nations, about the EU, the African Union, about some random stuff like the Telecommunication Union and so on.
Some random stuff.
It's not the most... okay. So we talked about the history and why it matters. The reason for which we did this is because we believe a new type of intergovernmental organization, of supranational organization, of super country is needed. One where us, the people, have a say. One where us, the people, can choose democratically how we are governed, can vote on topics, can run for elections, can be truly represented, right?
Yes.
And for this, it means we declare death to certain organizations and life to new ones. So we actually ended up yesterday's broadcast on the sentence, and I'm going to find the person
It was a very good sentence
who said it. So basically, when the League of Nations, which was the precursor of the United Nations, died in 1946, Robert Cecil, which was one of the fathers of the League of Nations, said in the final address, "The League is dead, long live the United Nations." So before understanding tomorrow, now that we say, the United Nations are dead, long live what? Or soon the United Nations will be dead, long live what? Let's actually look at something positive. So I would like to talk about the successes.
That would
like
be
what
cool.
worked well. Because we bitch a lot, right?
Yeah.
And
we always go against the United Nations.
Exactly. And also because right now, if you look at the news, and we can start with the news, what we see a lot are very negative things when it comes to intergovernmental organizations. So we're going to talk about the good things in order to shift the narrative. But tell me what you see on the news right now about anything global.
So I know that these days the G20 is happening in
What is
Indonesia.
it?
So the G20 is basically a forum built after the financial crisis, where the 20 biggest economies and powers, as they define themselves, sit together and basically try to coordinate global actions on topics like the economy and many other topics. Is kind of like the G7, that I think is a bit older. It used to be the G8, and now there's also the G20. And obviously the debate right now is a lot about Russia and Ukraine. Putin is the only leader of the G20 that didn't travel to Bali for the summit. So a lot of controversies there. And I think is a clear example, and I don't know, Colombi, if you want to elaborate on that, but where once more things are not going very smoothly for international organization, because it's a nice forum, people speak, but there's very little action after that.
Exactly. I think the one positive thing is Zelensky's speech yesterday, where he addressed the G20 as the G19, just kicking out Russia on his own, which I thought was great. No, completely. There's little action. I think it's also not a forum that is aimed for this type of action. It's made of a lot of authoritarian countries and non-democratic countries. So it's not ideal, and it's why we need more global organizations. So apart from the G20, there's also COP27 happening, right? Which is the conference on climate. And there as well, we see failure on failure on failure on failure. Basically, it looks like the 1.5 degree increase to basically keep the worst impacts of climate change on the wrap might be under question. So again, huge failure. That's what I came across when I saw when I typed in today's news intergovernmental organization. So I said, no, enough. We need positivity. We need good news. I'm tired of this. Every week is so difficult. So I went to look at the history. Mm-hmm. And again, I saw so many articles with all of the figures, and we will discuss them tomorrow in order to show what is needed. But I think there's always something good in a situation.
For sure.
And we need to look at it. So I went on the history of a few intergovernmental organizations in order to find some successes. And let me start from the Mission League 2,000 years ago.
The favorite one. The model of the model.
It's not whatsoever, but I find it super interesting. By the way, as always, one of us prepares, I prepared today, so the other one kind of comments and so on, so that it's not boring. We don't both know what we're going to talk about. Andrea has no idea what this is.
I just know about the Mission League from yesterday.
Yeah. But I just wanted to mention one thing. So there's very little that is known because it was more than 2,000 years ago, and not all texts have been preserved and so on. But it's the fact that I found quite a few writings saying that the League managed to remain strong despite constant threats of invasion and tentative of invasions by foreign powers and attempts by tyrants to take power. Okay. And it remained democratic and strong because of the unity of 23 cities. Huh. So together, they managed to pool resources and so on. So I just wanted to mention this because it goes completely in my sense. So it's very my argument that together we are stronger. Standing together, which is the translation of Mission League, is standing together. We are stronger. We stand more of a chance. And the Mission League managed to prove it in a very unlikely manner. And then I wanted to talk about 4 organizations and their successes. Andrea, you can choose the order. I'm going to tell you which ones.
Tell me which one. The Mission League again.
I'm trying to say that I have a problem. And the Organization of American States, the African Union, and the UN.
I think you should start from the African Union because it's newer, it's sometimes less known.
So I didn't look for overall successes of the African Union because I think that's like when you type successes of an international organization, for example, with the UN, I found like 10 treaties passed that year, 100 treaties, and that is not a sign of success, right? The fact that you promise to abide by certain standards, but then disregard them is not a sign of success. I saw a lot of things like climate treaties that no one is abiding to them. So instead, I went on the concrete, and I tried to find, let me tell you.
Concrete impact they have.
Yeah. So first of all, it was launched, the African Union, in 2000. Oh, wow.
I think 2002. I remember from your
2002. Discussion. And I found 3 main successes that I'd like to discuss.
So it's very new. It's younger than us.
Exactly. And I found 3 successes that happened in 2020.
Okay, so very recent.
Yes. So I just chose 1 year, right? It's not a whole, but it's to show what global collaboration can do. 1 is vaccine, 1 is debt relief, and 1 is free trade. Which one do you want to start with?
Free trade.
The one I know the least.
So that
no, free trade is great. So there's something that happened in the African Union. In 2020, the African Union was finally able to launch what is called the African Continental Free Trade Area, also very easily put in an acronym at AFCTFA. So basically the free trade area, which had been under development for over 2 years. That went in line with the economic integration priority of the African Union. And according to the World Bank, this will create the largest free trade area in the world. It will connect 1.3 billion people. And its success could potentially lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty.
That's incredible.
It's pretty cool, right?
And so basically they are trying to build a free trade union, kind of like the EU,
exactly.
in a way. Very interesting. I didn't know this.
So that happened in 2020. I haven't yet done research into how it's been implemented. It was launched in 2020. Its direct impact, I assume that this takes time to do in order to like put a lot of regulations, norms, and so on and so forth. But it is very cool. The largest ever free trade area in the world.
Very impressive.
So this just in 2020. Did you hear of it before?
I did not hear of it before. I'm very surprised because I mean it's an outstanding achievement. I'm sure that the implementation is not as easy as announcing, but I think that having such a massive free trade area would benefit and integrate a lot Africa as a continent.
And 30 million people can be lifted out of extreme poverty.
No, I mean it's really, really powerful. I'm very happy to see that.
And so I think that's really cool. Once more, showing that together we are stronger. It's not about putting up barriers, but actually destroying barriers, overcoming them, and better results exist for everyone, including getting out of extreme poverty.
Incredible. So first, big up for the African Union.
So let's go, since we started with the one I knew the least, let's go with the second one I knew the least, which is debt relief.
Okay.
So at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't know if you remember a lot of the debate around the fact that, not only did we not share vaccines, we hoarded vaccines in Western wealthy countries. And on top of this, we refused to share the IP rights, tech know-how, and so on. And then we expected countries that were low or middle income to be able to buy vaccines, which was insane, right? A lot of the low to middle income countries have big debts that come partially from the colonial era.
Or shortly after to rebuild and
exactly.
so on.
No, but I mean, it's like a direct consequence of it, right? Not all of it, but a part of it, right? Like you destroy, you loot, you hoard resources, and clearly it's going to be tough to reconstruct. So one, we should have erased those debts, in my opinion, a very long time ago, and actually paid compensation and so on for all of the crimes colonial countries committed, and supported way more on equal terms countries that were born post-colonial era. Sure. But then during COVID, when already the African continent was plagued by COVID, when we would not share vaccines, when we hoarded them, and we asked them to pay for vaccines, we needed to relieve some debt. It was impossible for countries to be able to afford it with such big debts. And actually, the African Union and its member states said, okay, well, this pandemic is going to be a shit show for us. It's going to be impossible to be able to deal with its economic consequences on the African continent unless we come up with a unified voice and say, no, some debts have to be relieved, cancelled, and so on. And actually, so they created, they appointed special negotiators who communicated with international financial contributors and institutions in order to discuss financial support and debt relief. And they managed, for example, to achieve debt relief for many middle and low-income countries like Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Kenya, and they secured financial assistance for Africa's pandemic response and future economic recovery.
So once more, unity led to great result.
Exactly.
Because unity also lies in number. So probably lots of countries together to actually force the elbow of many wealthy countries that own the debt and so on and so forth.
If the Ivory Coast went alone to its debtors and were like, just forget it, would never happen.
I mean, this is massive. So both these achievements are massive. One is to basically, as we said before, like integrate the African continent and relieve poverty. And the other one is basically the building block for prosperity.
Yeah.
If many African countries, as other countries across the planet, get out of the trap of debt, they can actually start for real changing things. So very, very impressive.
Yeah. So I thought those two examples were so cool because, again, I'm super biased because I live in Europe So when I see the news, what I see when it comes to like debt relief or support or solidarity is always the EU, even though we'll discuss it, not necessarily the case. But you don't hear about this common voice on debt, on free trade and so on of the African Union in Western media. And I thought it was very cool to see. And clearly it helped many countries and people in many fronts.
Impressive. Very cool to hear. So what was the third massive achievement?
And again, all of those are just, for those joining now, we're looking at achievements of intergovernmental organizations. And we're looking at the African Union just in 2020.
So very recently.
So then vaccines. So again, I took 2020, which is a pandemic year. So it's around debt relief, but there was free trade and vaccines. So in the second half of 2020, the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team was created. It's called AVAT, but whatever. This task team is a group of 10 individuals from across Africa whose main goal was to secure COVID-19 vaccines in order to achieve herd immunity across Africa by 2022.
Okay.
So basically, again, same story. At the beginning of the pandemic, wealthy countries hoarded vaccines, bought way more than they needed, and then refused to share the tech know-how and IP rights with others, which left a big part of the world in an insane situation because it wasn't only vaccines. Some parts of the world didn't have access to PPE and so on, didn't have the capacity to be able to deal with an epidemic on top of everything that happened in the last few years. And so the African Union was like, okay, sorry, I'm vulgar. Fuck no. Like, this can't happen again. It's not okay. I'm saying again because we see, for example, the TRIPS agreement that were created in order to not share HIV medication and life-saving medication. Like, no, we need to be able to achieve herd immunity as well. We need to get out of this. And so the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team was formed. And by February 2021, it had secured 1 billion doses. So within a few months, 1 billion doses.
And how come we never hear about this? Like, honestly, I follow a lot the vaccine issues about like wealthy country ordinary resources, and I didn't hear about that.
Yeah.
Do you think they just like the press doesn't cover it? It's not like interesting for the Western world? I don't know. Or it's scary, maybe.
So I think it's a rampant racism a lot of the time. It's like nothing good is coming out of Africa. They don't know how to do it. And when you have the biggest free trade area that was created, that relief and so on. And I think it also puts Western countries and international organizations that are not regional
in bad light.
In bad light.
Yeah.
Because all of this, the free trade area of the African Union. So just to recap for those who joined, in 2020, they launched the African Continental Free Trade Area, which connects 1.3 billion people and is the largest free trade area in the world and can lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty. So that's great. But the rest was as a response, so debt and vaccines. It was as a response of extremely selfish, nationalist, and stupid behavior. Stupid because we can't get out of the pandemic unless we all get out. Stupid behaviors from Western countries and intergovernmental organizations. Because whatever the WHO said, and we'll talk about the successes of the WHO actually later as well. Today is a positive day. Whatever the WHO says, they did not share vaccines.
Yeah.
The WHO created COVAX, a task force to share vaccines as well and so on. But a few countries hoarded all doses and did not share them and blocked any effort to share them.
They only share the one they didn't want anymore, or when most operation was covered, like all the beautiful acts were always taken as a second priority.
Exactly. And so the African Union was like, we're being left behind. We're going to suffer as a result of selfishness, stupidity, and nationalism. No. And they did this. But you have to wonder, why was it needed to create an African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team?
Yeah.
Why were vaccines not shared? Why were manufacturing efforts not taking place on the continent? Why didn't we distribute them fairly? Why didn't we share resources overall and so on, right?
And also about that the doses were secured, but then the deployment took probably longer. So these are obviously all lives lost. And this because there was not a global plan to deal with COVID.
Exactly.
So, but still a big success of the African Union.
Yes.
Another one on the vaccine. So in just 2 years, you can point out 3 very clear successes.
1 year. All of this happened within 1 year. I only took 2020.
Amazing. Very powerful.
Yeah.
So we cover African Union. Now, for those following us, we are going through existing supranational organizations.
And what they did well that we can learn when we destroy them and build new democratic ones.
Exactly, when we try to do better. So we covered the African Union. I think the other one, before going to the United Nations, it's obviously the biggest, we're going to cover, I think, the organizations of American states.
Yes.
And you are the expert.
So I found much less on this. So let me just tell you, so on the Organization of American States, I found a lot of successes that said like treaties were created, bodies were created, missions were launched, delegations were sent, and so on.
Things happen.
Exactly, saying that in the UN, when what I tried to do with the AU was to be more concrete with like, vaccines were secured and so on. However, so the Organization of American States is actually a quite new organization. I'm just trying to find the date of the founding at the same time.
From the 60s or something like that.
It's a bit. Sorry, let me just open it.
Colomb is Googling the founding day because I think they were already achievement in 79, so probably 60 or 70. But we have 48.
Yeah.
So actually quite even older than what I imagine.
Yeah. So it's an old organization. It created a few cool things like the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the Development Bank, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and they adopted an Inter-American Democratic Charter.
Okay. So a few concrete achievements.
Yeah. And I just want to mention two quick things. I'm sure it did a lot of very cool things, but I did a quick research on this. So the OAS missions supported peace processes in Nicaragua, Suriname, Haiti, and Guatemala.
Okay.
So actually peace engagement. And it played a major part in the removal of landmines deployed in many member states.
Okay.
So it did a lot of support on the ground in peace, election, democratic processes.
And this organization, it goes from basically Canada to Argentina, right? It's the whole of the Americas, not only Latin America.
So members.
Because so far,
it's not everyone.
It's probably not everyone, but I'm pretty sure that the US is there. Because
the US is there. Because one of the headquarters is DC.
Yeah. Which is interesting now that the US is, because normally the US is very wary of these things.
Members: Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, but I think it was suspended, Dominica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, the US, Uruguay, and Venezuela.
A lot of countries, and all the main ones.
And interestingly enough, Cuba is a member, but its government has been excluded from participation in the inter-American system since 1962 for incompatibility with the principles and objectives of that system.
I mean, being a dictatorship, clearly a dictatorship, they cannot. But Venezuela is still there, but it's a more modern dictatorship and maybe less cruel. So
exactly. However, I wanted to focus a bit before moving to the UN on the EU. So tell me what you think of the successes. You know the EU. Explain to us why you know the EU.
So I know the EU because I, together with Colomb and a friend called Damien, I did a big effort in advancing European politics. We launched a party called Volt in 2016 or 17. And we actually elected Damien, our co-founder, to the European Parliament. And Volt is still running. We have elected people across national parliaments in the Netherlands, in Bulgaria. So an interesting experiment about European politics. And the reason why we started that was actually because the EU was a bit under threat from recent nationalistic surges in, for example, in the United Kingdom that led to Brexit. But we see them also in France, where the far right is very strong, in Germany, now in Italy, where a lot of the leading actors in politics nowadays across Europe are, if not anti-EU anymore, because they understood that in the last 10 years being without the EU would be very detrimental for European states, but surely enough, very anti-integration, anti-advancement of the European project. And in terms of achievements of the EU, I mean, there are many. The one that I can definitely share and recall is the fact that since the EU is in effect, there's been no war within the member states of the EU. So not war at all, because, for example, in the Balkans, there was a war in the 90s, and now there's a war in Ukraine. But among the member states, there's been peace, which is highly unusual for Europe, historically looking.
Yeah, exactly. What else do you think are some achievements? So peace is a pretty good one.
Peace is a good one. I'm sure that integration in terms of economic, free trade union, mobility.
And why are those good things?
I think that it's been proven, and again, I'm assuming, but it's been very clearly proven that the prosperity of Europe is also linked to the fact that the European Union enabled for basically more shared prosperity and wealth. So the standard of living of most Europeans increased a lot in the last 70 years. Despite the fact that the European economy, especially in recent history, are not really booming in terms of growth or expansion, but having a free trade area, the ability of, for example, negotiating trade agreements outside as a bloc, acting on many matters as a bloc, and also the fact of being mobile, so the fact that Europeans can live abroad and they don't need a visa, I think helped a lot. The prosperity and the growth and the benefits the European got in the last 70 years.
You touched on a lot of really good things, and congratulations, a gold sticker for you.
Thank you. I'm very proud.
I came across, so I also worked quite a bit on the EU, as you mentioned, but I tried to look at it from a more objective way. So selected 10 achievements of the EU that are concrete.
Okay.
Peace, as you mentioned, long-term peace within European countries, extremely rare. The single market is probably one of the single biggest achievements of the EU. And that's because you have free movements of people, goods, services, and capital. So obviously it unifies people, but it also created huge opportunities, but enormous opportunities for people to travel, live, work, study, do business across the EU. And as a result, they had so many more opportunities, prices were more fairly priced, services and goods were easier to come across the union, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think that's huge. And I think the EU is one probably of the few areas in the world where traveling across the EU happens often. So I remember someone telling me, let me find it, how many people cross borders regularly
I think it's a big number,
EU.
like 30%. Like, it's a big thing. Yeah, almost.
No, that's a different thing.
I think 25% is so. 25% travel across the EU.
Okay, so we'll double check it after, but 25%, like, it's huge. People from, like, often live in one country and work on another one when they live at the border and so on, right? So it's a proper integration.
And also because together with the EU, there is also the Treaty Schengen.
Yeah.
So basically a treaty that is it doesn't apply to all EU member states, but many member states, where you can cross borders and without even showing a passport. So there are no more border controls at all. Right, Ron?
Exactly, which is so cool. Then, so we mentioned peace, single market, single currency. So the Eurozone was established and it was made up of 17 member states in 1999. And so obviously there's been concerns about it with some countries wanting to exit it. But a lot of Europeans see the benefits when they travel, they don't have to convert money, and it enabled economic growth across the continents.
It's still the second most used currency in the world, I think. So.
And it helped improve the EU's international standing and integration, basically. So single market, single currency, easier passport-free travel.
We mentioned.
So you mentioned the Schengen Agreement, which 15 member countries of the EU signed it. Mm-hmm. So you don't have theoretically border posts. It's possible to travel freely, easily, and this means that it's, you integrate more and more. I'm saying theoretically because a lot of borders were actually erased without us knowing it. So I remember I did during the European elections in March between Germany, Luxembourg, and France, which are three countries that are supposed to be part of it. And but in many places, your passport is still being controlled due to terrorist threats, to whatever.
Yeah, or just like a bit of we can call it racism, maybe it's more like regionalism or whatever. But definitely, for example, many Eastern European countries still outside of Schengen, and slowly they're being integrated.
Exactly. Okay, I'm actually going to skip some because it's too long. I think a really cool thing that we saw ourselves is roaming charges. And I think that's a real success because we were talking about being able to travel freely. I think it was a couple of years ago, right? That like roaming charges between countries were abolished. And so now the UK is out of it, which I'm paying so much when I travel. But basically, you could use your data plan whether you were in the EU, which again made it easier.
Yeah. So really concrete, let's say, changes that you can feel on your skin. Obviously, sometimes they're still like not the most important thing in life. It would be more important to have a common minimum wage or stuff like that. But I mean, better than nothing, I'd say. There is an improvement in a way. And now we're moving on to the most known and respected and also sometimes bashed supranational organization, the United Nations.
Exactly. So what are the successes of the UN? When I Googled this, I was like, the Montreal Convention on climate. No. And then I was like, the climate is literally killing us all. I don't think it was a great success. So I tried to go hyper-specific on the successes of the United Nations. The first one I selected concerns pyramids.
Okay,
I told you I was going specific.
That's very concrete and specific.
And so UNESCO, which is the UN's cultural agency, it has basically a list of World Heritage Sites, right? Like sometimes when you go in somewhere, you see World Heritage Site, it's protected. It means it's culturally significant. You have to preserve and protect it. There's an area around the Giza pyramids and Sphinx in Egypt that is basically a cultural site and it's a protected site. But then basically the government began an 8-lane highway construction south of the Sphinx and of 3 Great Pyramids in 1995. And it threatened the architecture site and the very ancient structure. So UNESCO dispatched an expert mission to Egypt and let's divert the highway. And it worked. The pyramids are standing, the highway didn't kill it.
So very concrete achievement.
Very concrete. It preserved heritage.
And I guess it happened across the planet, so Egypt is just one example.
Yeah, but I like the pyramids example.
Yeah,
so
it's very clear. Everyone knows the pyramid problem.
Exactly.
Good job. Can you describe the pyramid?
I'm trying to.
If I never been there.
I'm trying to be concrete.
Okay, then?
The second example, very concrete, because I love to bash WHO, but a really cool example is smallpox.
Okay.
I mean, smallpox is not cool. The eradication of smallpox is a very cool example. So the WHO, which by the way is the World Health Organization, is a UN agency, it led the effort to eradicate smallpox. Because by 1980, there were 13 years. Sorry, let me try this again. By 1980, it was the 13 years of immunization campaign, and the WHO declared a smallpox extinction.
So they actually eradicated a very scary disease.
And then I think there's a really cool one. UNICEF helped to save over 90 million children since 1990.
So clearly a massive impact. Let's see, the UN actually on aid, famine relief, emergency intervention, they did actually a lot. I mean, because they have the arms to basically create international response.
Exactly.
It's very powerful. And I would add something. I don't know if it's, I mean, I assume it was into the UN, but the fact that there's not been a nuclear war since the UN has been created. So nuclear treaties, not nuclear war, but like the usage of nuclear weapons has never been, didn't take place since 1945, 1946. Yeah. So I don't know
if it's linked to because we saw how shit it is.
Yeah, but definitely they facilitated nuclear treaties. So despite the fact they did not stop war, they probably had to stop a nuclear war.
Okay, I have one more good news because I'm optimistic and blah blah blah, but like in today's world, the world kind of sucks between between a few years of COVID, climate, Russia, Syria, Yemen. I can keep on going. Pretty much that's. So if you open the news today, when I opened the news this morning, I read about Ukraine. So war crimes being committed in Ukraine. I read about China's repressive policies. And I read about so many conflicts.
Okay.
I remember something like that told me a long time ago. I think I was still in high school. He told me, Colombe, I was thinking like the world is so messed up. It's horrible. I was seeing everything in a very dark light. We were learning in school about different conflicts, and I was like, it's so messed up. How did you leave us such a world? How did we arrive here? And he was like, what you're saying, I said it to my parents, and my parents said it to their parents. And my dad is really not an optimist, but he was like, every generation believes that they're doomed. Every generation believes that it's worse, and it doesn't mean that you should fight hard to make it better. But it means you need to look at history through more of a macro lens in order to be able to understand it instead of just on the day-to-day. And I get overwhelmed every single day by what's happening. And so I went to Google Peace and peace rates, basically. And something that blew my mind is that thanks to global collaboration, I think, and worldwide, there were fewer people who died in conflict in the first decade of the 21st century than in any decade of the 20th century.
So there is a positive decrease in that.
Yeah.
Very good. So but I feel that somehow humanity is understanding.
I didn't look at the second decade because I was scared.
But I think somehow humanity is learning some lessons. Like you see that people are a bit more understanding, like they understand that they are global form, the international cooperation is important, that even crazy fascists like we have in certain countries understand that they should not dismantle the UN or they should not leave the European Union. So I think that there are lessons learned, just that we should learn way faster. That's the problem. Like humanity is very slow at absorbing lessons. And so Zelensky said it yesterday, I think, or today, we're still doing the same mistakes they used to do like 100 years ago.
Exactly. But don't end up on the bad
side.
Because
we're learning a lot.
And tomorrow you get to be as negative as you want.
No, I want to be positive.
So to recap, this beautiful, amazing, happy, positive life, which probably will never happen again, so enjoy it. And we looked at yesterday the history of supranational organization. We looked at from the first century before Christ to today, how humans managed to collaborate across borders. And that in itself, for me, is an incredibly positive thing. It's beautiful. Like from the first century before Christ, people understood that there's strength in unity, there's beauty in unity, that together you are stronger, you are better. It's incredible.
It's incredible.
It's incredible.
Very positive.
Then it kind of went down, and then it went up again with the creation of the League of Nations and the United Nations and so on. There's always some issues with any human-made system. I was also listening yesterday to a podcast on criminal justice, random thing, but a Supreme Court justice in Ohio said with any human-made system, you have errors, you have mistakes, whatever happens. And I think that's very true. So we need to improve it. We need to demolish what doesn't work. We need to rebuild and so on. But humans still manage to collaborate. The African Union in the year 2020 managed to do more than any individual country.
Yeah.
Between the free trade area, between COVID vaccines for all, between debt relief, like it's insane. So it's really cool. It makes me very happy.
So we are positive.
Well, yeah, I on purpose kept my file of bad news for tomorrow. Because tomorrow...
But I would say we are positive because we know that even in imperfect system, we achieved a lot of positive things.
See.
So if we do better, if we actually build a better system, we can really change the world.
Exactly. And we're doing this because we want to build a democratic global country, because our movement Atlas, so find the link, click, join, subscribe, donate, share, sharing is caring, all of it. Our movement Atlas is working to crowdsource a democratic global governance, then push it in front of the United Nations, and then build it. And so for it, we're examining how countries were built, how supranational organizations were built, their strengths, their weaknesses, what we should keep, what we should remove, the lessons learned, and so on. And today, there are a few cool things.
They are very cool. There are a lot of cool things. So
tune in tomorrow for all of the bad news.
No, let's do it positively.
No. Tomorrow we'll look not at the bad news. We'll look at how not why it doesn't work, because I think global cooperation works better than anything else. We'll look at why certain structural mistakes in how we built those institutions lead to them not being able to deal with the world today.
Yeah.
And as a result, the huge opportunity it creates for us to build something better.
So I'm much looking forward to it. I don't know if I'm gonna prepare it. You're gonna prepare it.
Oh, please prepare it.
Maybe I prepare it myself. But I found this week very fascinating because we're actually getting into really the policy making and the institution building that we need to understand to achieve our vision. So thank you so much. Tune in tomorrow at the same time. And maybe we're going to have a different background. We're traveling, so it changes every day. But please let us know if you find this interesting. Let us know, comment, and let's do this together.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.